Welcome. You've made it here, and that's enough. Tonight, we'll rest together in the light of two gentle stories woven not with noise, but with stillness. These are stories for the quiet-hearted, for those who've waited long, prayed in silence, and left a light on for God, for someone they love, or maybe for themselves. So take a deep breath, set aside the weight of the day. Let these stories carry you slowly into peace and into the loving presence of the one who never leaves. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. It started with a flame, not a fire that burned wildly or roared across the sky, not even the kind that warmed your hands by the hearth. No, it was gentler than that. It flickered inside a brass candlestick, resting on a little table near the window of a woman named Miriam. She had lived alone for many years. Not lonely, but alone. And there's a difference. Isn't there loneliness aches? Aloneness sometimes whispers peace. Miriam's house was small, but clean. The kind of place that smelled like old books and lavender oil. Each evening, just before the sun slipped behind the trees, she would light the candle, always the same way, one deep breath, one quiet prayer, one slow strike of the match. Then, the light. She would sit in her old wooden chair beside the window, the candle burning softly beside her, and open her Bible. The pages were worn, edges curled, underlined with pencil from decades ago. She never read fast. She wasn't looking for answers anymore. She was listening for presence. The candle had been a gift. She couldn't remember from whom. Perhaps it had come from her mother, or perhaps from a church friend long since passed. But it had been with her through everything: the passing of her husband, the silence after the children moved away, the winter nights when the wind howled louder than her thoughts. And still, the flame never felt alone. It always seemed to know its purpose. On this particular evening, something felt different. The summer light lingered longer, as if the Lord himself had paused time, just to let Miriam breathe in the stillness. She struck the match and lit the candle. The flame rose, and then settled into its gentle dance. Miriam whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for still being near." The words weren't dramatic. There were no tears, just that simple offering of gratitude, like a letter sealed in silence and sent to heaven. And in that moment, it felt as though the room itself had exhaled. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There was a bird on the windowsill, a sparrow, small and brown, with feathers tousled by the wind. It did not fly away when Miriam turned her gaze. It only watched her, and it. For a brief second, Miriam remembered Jesus' words, "Not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father knowing." She smiled. Perhaps this little bird was a reminder. Not everything loud is holy. Sometimes it is the stillness that sings. The candle continued to glow beside her. No flicker, no dimming, just a steady light, like God's presence, unmoving, undramatic, unwavering. That night, she read the Psalms. Not all of them, just one or two. She let each word settle in her bones. The Lord is my light. Yes, she thought, as the flame flickered. He always has been. She closed her Bible gently, like tucking in a child, folded her hands, let her eyes drift toward the candle. Then, like she had for years, she sat in silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had said enough. And sometimes, enough is holy. Bedtime spiritual takeaway: you are not forgotten. God sees you in the quiet, and His light never leaves. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you. Isaiah 46:4. The next morning came softly, like a hymn hummed by the earth. Miriam woke with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing urgent to do. Only holy things to notice. The birds were already singing outside her window. The candle, now just a wick of silence, stood where she had left it. It had burned faithfully through the evening hours, then faded into rest without fuss. She touched its brass base with a reverent hand, as one might touch the shoulder of a beloved friend. "You did well," she whispered, smiling, and then she made tea. There is something sacred about the slow steeping of tea in the morning light, the sound of the kettle, the curling steam, the way your hands wrap around a warm cup as if cradling peace itself. Miriam drank slowly, wrapped in her woolen shawl. The sky outside was pale gold, stretched wide over the fields like a promise. She didn't have a schedule anymore, not like the old days of laundry and lunches and calls from the school. No, now the hours unfolded like pages in a devotional. Quiet, steady, unhurried. She thought of Paul, the apostle, how often he must have waited between towns, between letters, between the moving of the Spirit. Waiting, but not wasted. So too were her days now, full of small graces, a note in the mailbox, the scent of honeysuckle by the porch, the way the Lord seemed to speak without words. By mid-morning, she settled again near the window. The chair creaked as it received her familiar with her weight, her prayers, her way of resting one foot just beneath the other. She opened her Bible once more. "Today, Isaiah, even to your old age and gray hairs," she read aloud, her voice a whisper of soft paper and age. She paused, then read it again. "I am He who will sustain you." The tears came, not like a storm, but like dew, quiet, gentle, just enough to say, "Yes, Lord." I needed to hear that. Take a deep breath. Let the words settle softly in your spirit. There had been a time years ago when she had felt forgotten. It was after James died, her husband of 40 years. She had made him tea that morning, the same way she had done since they were newly married. He had smiled, kissed her hand, and walked out into the garden. By noon, he was gone. A heart that had given so much had simply stopped. And hers it had broken, but not shattered, because somehow, even then, she knew the Lord had carried her, not away from grief, but through it. There were mornings, back then, when she would sit in this same chair and say nothing for hours, not because she didn't believe, but because she had no words left. Still, the candle kept burning. Even when her heart was quiet, the flame remained. That meant something. Today, the ache was different, not sharp, just tender, like the memory of a song you haven't heard in decades. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she could see it, James in the garden, laughing, praying, picking tomatoes. He had always said he wanted to meet the Lord with dirt on his hands. Perhaps he had. The candle would be lit again tonight. She already knew it. It had become more than a habit. It was an altar, a way of saying, Lord, I'm here. Still, yours. The clock ticked softly. The wind pressed gently against the panes. Miriam didn't need much anymore. Just this light, this peace, this promise that even in her old age, she was being carried. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Your days are not forgotten, even now. God is carrying you with gentleness and grace. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Exodus 33:14. The day passed like honey over warm bread, slow, golden, and sweet in a quiet way. Miriam spent it tending her garden, trimming the rosemary bush, and brushing dust from the porch swing. Small things, but holy in their own rhythm. It was late afternoon now, and the sun had begun its descent behind the trees. The house grew still again, as it always did before evening. This was her favorite hour, when the light outside dimmed just enough to welcome the glow of the candle inside. She stood near the window and watched the shadows stretch across the field. Birds flew low, and the wind softened its voice. The Lord, she had come to believe, often arrived this way, not with thunder, but with hush. Her hands moved with the quiet authority of one who had done this many times before. She struck the match, lit the candle. The flame came quickly tonight, tall and sure, like it had been waiting. She sat. There are moments when everything slows, and it feels as if time bows to eternity. This was such a moment. Miriam held her Bible in her lap, unopened. She didn't need to read right away. Tonight, she simply wanted to be. She watched the flame dance, and for a moment, she felt it a presence in the room, not imagined, not dramatic, just there, like a hand resting on your shoulder in the dark. Take a deep breath. Let the quiet surround you. She remembered a night long ago. She must have been 8 or 9. Her mother had tucked her into bed during a thunderstorm. The wind had howled. The windows rattled. But her mother had lit a candle and placed it on the nightstand. "Don't be afraid," she'd whispered, smoothing Miriam's hair. "This little light will remind you that God is here, even in the storm." Miriam remembered staring at that flame until her eyes closed. And now, decades later, she lit one for the same reason. Storms had come and gone in her life. Some had broken trees, others had broken dreams, but not her faith. That had only grown quieter, deeper, more rooted. Sometimes, in the early years, she had wanted God to shout, to break in, to change things. But with age, she learned that he often whispered instead. Not because he was distant, but because he was so near. She didn't need to strain to hear him. She finally opened her Bible. It fell to Exodus. "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." She read it aloud, once, twice. Then she closed her eyes and let it sit in her soul. The candle didn't flicker. The room didn't move. But something inside her opened. A space, a breath, a knowing that no matter how many years passed, no matter how many evenings remained. He would go with her, to the garden, to the grave, to glory. He was already there. The sky darkened outside. The trees became shadows. Miriam rose slowly and moved to the porch, carrying her candle. She sat on the swing, holding it in her hands. The light spilled softly onto her lap, onto her shawl, onto her heart. She whispered a prayer not with words, but with presence. Just being with God, just letting Him be with her. No need to speak. Just light, just breath, just peace. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't need to chase Him. He's already with you. Rest in that. In quietness and trust is your strength. Isaiah 30:15. The next morning came with soft rain, the kind that tiptoes across windows and makes the whole world feel wrapped in a quilt. Miriam didn't rush to get up. She stayed beneath her blankets, listening to the patter. There was something sacred about rain at her age. It slowed everything down without asking permission. She whispered her morning prayer before her feet even touched the floor. Thank you for today, Lord. I don't need it to be remarkable. I just need you to be near. She sat by the window after breakfast, wrapped in her thick cardigan. The candle from last night still on the table burnt down just a little more than before. She smiled at it. You stayed with me again, she said softly. Thank you. Then a knock. It was quiet, tentative. Not the kind of knock that demanded. More like one that hoped. Miriam stood slowly, joints stiff from sleep and years, and opened the door. It was Lily. Lily had been the church pianist once, 40 years younger than Miriam. Now a mother of 3, often busy, but always kind. She held a covered dish in her hands. Rain clung to her curls. I was making soup, she said, almost apologetically, and thought of you. I hope it's not too much. Miriam's eyes softened. Come in, child. And so, Lily did. Take a deep breath. Let someone's kindness settle gently inside you. They sat in the kitchen. The candle wasn't lit, but the room still felt warm. Lily talked about the children, about the struggle to pray lately, about how hard it was to feel anything but tired. I don't even know what I believe half the time, she whispered, embarrassed. I mean, I know God is there. I just don't feel Him like I used to. Miriam didn't offer a sermon. She simply poured Lily a cup of tea and pushed the sugar bowl toward her. I used to think God had disappeared, Miriam said, when, really, I had just stopped sitting still long enough to notice He was still there. Lily looked up, eyes damp. Miriam added, He doesn't always speak in the wind. Sometimes it's in the waiting, in the quiet. They didn't fill the silence after that. They just sat, 2 women from different seasons of life, breathing in the same stillness. The rain tapped gently on the roof, and without saying anything, Miriam reached over and lit the candle. The flame rose as it always did, without rush, without noise. Lily watched it flicker, then steady. She whispered, That's beautiful. Miriam nodded. It reminds me of Him, always present, even when the room is dark. Later, as Lily stood to leave, she paused at the door. Thank you, she said, for the tea, for this. Miriam touched her hand gently. Come back any time. The light is always here. Lily left with a fuller heart than when she came. And Miriam, she sat by the window again. Candle lit, Bible unopened. Not out of neglect, but because sometimes being still is worship enough. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't need the right words. Sometimes, your presence in God's presence is more than enough. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. It had been a week of soft rains and quiet mornings. Miriam welcomed it. The garden didn't need watering. The telephone hadn't rung, and the candle her evening companion had burned faithfully each night beside her chair, casting its hush of light across the worn pages of her Bible and the gentle folds of her aging hands. She had noticed lately that her body was growing slower, not in a frightening way, but like the slowing of an old waltz at its final refrain. There was no fear in it, only awareness. Some people chase youth, but Miriam, she had learned to treasure stillness. It had taken her most of her life to understand that the silence of God is not His absence. It is His nearness too sacred for noise. On this particular evening, she lit the candle just after dusk. She didn't read. She didn't pray aloud. She simply sat and listened, not for thunder, not for angels, but for the holy hush that wrapped itself around the room like a soft blanket. She closed her eyes, and a memory came to her so clear, so kind. It felt like a whisper from heaven. It was the memory of her son Caleb when he was 6 years old. He had climbed into her lap one night after a thunderstorm had shaken the house. He didn't say much, just nestled there, heart pressed against hers. After a while, he whispered, "Mom, I feel better now. I didn't need you to say anything. I just needed to be where you are." She had nodded, brushing back his hair, and now, decades later, she felt the same way about God. Take a deep breath, be still, as if resting your head on the chest of eternity. Sometimes, people think they have to do something to feel God's presence. But Miriam had come to believe that God often meets us when we stop trying and start simply being. There were seasons when she had read chapters each night, hungry for truth. Other times, she had prayed for hours, searching for comfort. But lately, it was this, the stillness, that brought her closest. She imagined God sitting beside her, not fixing, not teaching, just being. And she resting in that being. No pressure to speak, no need to understand, just presence. Outside, the moon rose gently over the treetops. The candle flickered once, then steadied. Miriam leaned her head back and whispered with a smile, "Thank you for not rushing me." And in her heart, she felt the answer, not in words, but in peace. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God is not waiting for your performance. He simply wants to be with you. In stillness, you are deeply known and deeply loved. Cast all your cares on Him because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. The morning came like a soft sigh, barely lifting the curtains. Miriam stayed in bed longer than usual, not from sadness or fatigue, just a kind of holy reluctance to rush what did not need rushing. She opened her eyes slowly, letting the day come to her. Outside, the leaves shimmered in the breeze. Somewhere, a dove called, and for no particular reason at all, she thought of Hannah, her daughter. It had been nearly a year since they'd spoken, not out of anger, just distance. Life had grown loud for Hannah. Work, children, commitments. Sometimes the phone calls came weeks apart, sometimes not at all. Miriam had never complained, never pushed, but in the quiet of her evenings, especially after the candle was lit, she would sometimes whisper Hannah's name into the light, a prayer without edges, just a mother's heart, lifted, and today she felt led to write, not a formal letter, just a note, one that might never be sent. She pulled a piece of stationery from her writing drawer, the kind with roses in the corners, the kind James had once bought her, decades ago. She picked up her pen and wrote, "My dearest Hannah, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll send it. I just wanted to say, you are not far from me, not in the ways that matter. I think of you when the wind moves the branches outside the window. I think of you when I light the candle each night and the room grows quiet. I pray for you not because I'm worried, but because I love you. And when I do, I imagine God holding you, even when I cannot. If life is heavy, let it be. You don't have to carry it alone. One day, I hope you'll sit with me again in this old chair. We won't need to say much. We'll just light the candle and let God do the speaking. Love always. Mom." She folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer. No stamp, no envelope. Just written, just offered. Sometimes the act of giving your heart to paper is enough. Take a deep breath. Let go of something heavy, even just for a while. That evening, when the shadows lengthened and the house began to hum with hush, Miriam lit the candle once more. The flame caught quickly. It felt almost expectant. She sat, Bible unopened, hands resting gently in her lap. "Lord," she whispered, "you know what's needed. I trust you." And the room, as always, held the stillness like a sacred secret. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. There are prayers too deep for words. God hears them all, even the ones you write, but never send. Surely your goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. That evening began like all the others, quiet, unhurried, gently wrapped in gold. Miriam had just lit her candle and was settling into her chair when she heard the soft creak of the front gate. Unusual. Very few came this way after dusk. She waited, listening. Then light footsteps on the porch, a pause, and a knock. She opened the door slowly, candlelight behind her casting a gentle glow over the old wood floor, and there stood Hannah. No suitcase, no children tugging her coat, no phone in hand, just her. Eyes a little red, hair damp from the mist, heart open, even if unsure. "Hi, Mom," she said. Miriam didn't speak. She simply reached forward, wrapped her daughter in her arms, and held her. Not like someone who had waited for an apology. Not like someone who needed to say, "I told you so." But like someone who had never stopped loving, because she hadn't. Take a deep breath. Let the warmth of being received soften something inside you. Inside, the candle burned brighter. Miriam poured tea. They sat side by side near the window, the silence not awkward, but sacred. Hannah finally spoke. "I didn't plan to come," she said. "I was just driving. I had a headache, and the kids were yelling, and I just kept thinking of this place, of you." She looked down at her hands. "I know I haven't called. I know I've been distant." Miriam placed her hand gently over hers. "There's nothing to explain," she said. Hannah looked at the candle. "You still light it? Every night? Even when you're alone? Especially then?" Miriam smiled. "That's when I remember who's really with me." The two of them sat in silence, like an old song being sung again after years of forgetting the melody. There were no speeches, no apologies rehearsed, only presence, and presence was enough. The candle, as always, stayed steady. a small fire of faith, flickering, but never going out. Later, as they stood to head to bed, Hannah paused by the table. She reached toward the candle, her voice soft. "Can I light it with you tomorrow?" Miriam nodded, eyes misted. "I'd like that very much." And for the first time in a long while, the house felt full again. Not noisy, not crowded, but full in the most sacred sense. Two hearts, quietly drawn back to the same light. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Love waits patiently. Grace welcomes without question. And God is always ready to receive us, even when we return slowly. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. The next evening, just as the sky began to blush with the colors of dusk, two women stood in the quiet kitchen, one old, one not so old, but both carrying stories in their hearts. Miriam held the candle in her hands. It looked smaller now, the wax having thinned from many nights of faithful burning. But the wick still waited, eager to rise. She turned to Hannah. "Would you like to light it tonight?" Hannah hesitated, her fingers brushing over the brass base as if touching something sacred. "Are you sure?" Miriam nodded. "Lighting this candle has never been about ritual," she said gently. "It's been about remembering who God is, what He's done, that we're never alone." Hannah struck the match, slowly, unsure, but then let it fall to the wick. The flame caught, rose, and settled just like always. They carried the candle together to the sitting room, placed it by the window, sat in the two chairs, shoulder to shoulder. The room seemed to hold its breath and then exhale. "I used to think light meant things had to be fixed," Hannah said quietly. "That healing had to come before peace." Miriam didn't answer right away. She let the candle speak. "I think," she finally whispered, "that healing often comes as we sit with what isn't fixed and still trust God is with us there. Take a deep breath. Let that thought find its way inside you." Hannah looked down at her lap. "I didn't come back because everything is better," she said. "I came back because I didn't want to walk alone anymore." "You never were," Miriam replied, brushing a loose strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "And neither was I." Outside, the stars began to appear one by one, quiet witnesses to what was unfolding below. The candle flickered a little in the draft, then steadied, not afraid, just alive. Miriam leaned back in her chair, her body tired in the way that feels earned, like the peace after planting a garden. She turned to Hannah, voice a near whisper. "Someday, when I'm not here, I hope you'll still light this candle." "I will," Hannah said, eyes full, "even if you feel far from God." Especially then. They sat for a long time, no longer needing to fill the silence. The room had been filled already with peace, with light, with Him. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God's light is not fragile. Even when passed from one heart to another, it does not fade. It endures. Always. "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." Isaiah 26:3. It was a morning like any other, and yet not like any other at all. The candle had burned low through the night, flickering its final threads of light just before dawn, the way a lullaby ends in a whisper. Miriam had slept in her chair, a blanket tucked around her shoulders. Hannah's doing, no doubt. The Bible was still open on her lap, Psalm 121 half read. Her breath was soft, steady, but slower than before. Outside, the sparrows called gently to one another, and the trees swayed like old saints swaying in prayer. The world didn't know it yet, but heaven had drawn near. Hannah stirred from the guest room. She moved quietly, sensing something sacred. The candle had gone out. Only a faint trail of smoke curled from the wick. She stepped into the room and saw her mother sitting there, eyes closed. The corners of her lips turned up just slightly, as if still listening. "Mom." No answer, no movement, just peace, real settled peace. She knelt beside her and rested her head on her mother's hand. It was warm, still, and Hannah did not cry, not right away, because in that moment, the silence did not feel like absence. It felt like completion, a life fully given, a light passed on. She stayed like that a while, letting the morning come, letting the candle cool. Take a deep breath. Let grief be gentle. Let peace remain. Later that day, Hannah found the little rose-printed stationery in the writing drawer, the note addressed to her. She read it slowly, every word soaking into her like soft rain after drought, and she wept not from sorrow alone, but from the sacred beauty of being known. Even in absence, she lit the candle that night, sat in the same chair, opened the same Bible, and though the grief pulsed deep inside her, the flame steadied her. Her mother's presence, God's presence, the memory of a life shaped by gentle light, it all lived there. Bedtime's spiritual takeaway. Even when someone you love is gone, their light remains in your hands, in your memory, and in the quiet places where God still dwells. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you, nor forsake you. Deuteronomy 31:6. Time passed, as it always does, slow at first, like a stream still learning the bends in the path. Hannah stayed in the house for several days after her mother's passing. The neighbors brought bread. The pastor came and prayed over the chair by the window. There was no fanfare, only peace, only quiet, just as Miriam would have wanted. The candle remained on the little table. Hannah dusted around it, touched its brass edges, but didn't light it right away. Not out of neglect, but out of reverence. Some flames need time before they're kindled again. Then, 1 week to the day after Miriam left this world for the next, Hannah found herself sitting in that old chair as dusk pressed its golden hand against the window pane. She held the box of matches in her lap. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just listened to the wind in the trees, to the silence in the room, to the memory of a voice that once whispered, "You are never alone." She struck the match and lit the candle. The flame rose slowly this time, as if stretching its arms after rest, and then it burned, gently, faithfully. Like always, take a deep breath. Let the flame in your own heart rise again. That night, Hannah read aloud for the first time, not to anyone in the room, just to the silence, to the light. She chose Psalm 139. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. She paused. The candle flickered, and she whispered, "Hold me fast, Lord." In the days that followed, she began to light the candle every evening. Sometimes alone, sometimes with her children. She would tell them stories, not dramatic tales, but soft ones, about faith, about peace, about their grandmother, who once lit this very candle to remember that God was always near. And in those stories, a new rhythm began to form, a holy inheritance, passed not through wealth or fame, but through stillness, through quiet, through light. Years later, when Hannah grew old and her own hands trembled with time, the candle sat in her own home now, in a new chair by a new window. Her daughter, Rachel, asked one night, "Why do you light that candle every evening?" Hannah smiled, and with a voice that echoed all the years before her, she said, "So I remember who is with me." She lit it again, and the flame burned, not because of her, but because light never forgets its way home. Final bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even when one life ends, the light of God continues in the next heart, the next room, the next quiet moment. He is with us, always. And now, the flame continues. If the first story reminded you that God's light never goes out even in silence, then this next one will wrap you in the quiet truth that waiting is never wasted. So stay right where you are. Let your spirit stay soft. And listen now to another story about the porch light that never stopped shining. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in His word I put my hope. Psalm 135. There was a little white house tucked at the end of a quiet street, where the maples arched overhead like cathedral beams and the breeze always seemed to carry a hymn. In that house lived Elsie. She was 83, her voice soft, her hands thin, her presence gentle, and every night, without fail, she turned on the porch light. It didn't matter if no one was coming. It didn't matter if the whole street was asleep. She would walk to the front door, flip the little brass switch, and watch the warm yellow light spill across the steps like a silent invitation. She'd whisper to herself, just in case someone needs to know they're welcome. It had started years ago, when her husband, Tom, was still alive. He used to say, "You never know who might come by lost, lonely, late." So they kept the light on, always, even after he passed. Elsie kept it glowing. Some nights, it felt like she was lighting it for him. Other nights, for the Lord. Most nights, she wasn't sure, but still, the porch light shone. Elsie's evenings were quiet now. She'd sit in the same rocking chair, the cushion a little worn in the middle, a cup of tea, a worn Bible, and the porch light humming its faithful glow behind her. She didn't need much. The world had gotten too fast, too loud, too crowded. But this little space, this chair, this word, this waiting felt like peace. Take a deep breath. Let the slowness gather around you. She remembered when her children were young, how they'd come running up those steps, feet muddy, voices wild with laughter. She remembered holidays' pies cooling on the windowsill, Tom whistling in the kitchen. She remembered the long years since, when the house grew still, and the only footsteps were her own. But somehow, the porch light kept her company. It didn't speak, but it stayed, and something about that felt like God. One evening, as dusk settled low and the first stars blinked above the trees, Elsie opened her Bible to the Psalms, the same one she'd opened for decades. "I wait for the Lord," she read softly. "My whole being waits." She looked out through the screen door. The street was empty, but she turned on the porch light anyway and whispered, "I'm waiting, Lord," but not alone. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even in quiet waiting, God is present. And sometimes, leaving the light on is an act of faith. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13:2. It had been raining all afternoon. The soft, steady kind of rain that paints everything gray and slows the rhythm of the world. Elsie didn't mind. Rain made the house feel cozier. She'd spent most of the day curled beneath her knitted blanket, reading old devotionals and sipping tea that had long gone lukewarm. The rain tapped lightly on the windows. Her clock ticked. Outside, the street was empty. Still, as always, just before the sky turned to ash, she turned on the porch light. She didn't expect anything. She never did. It was simply a rhythm now, a habit wrapped in hope. The switch clicked beneath her fingers. The yellow light flickered, then glowed. She stepped back and whispered, "Let someone know they're not forgotten." That night, she was just settling into her rocker with her Bible when she noticed it. A shadow. Not one cast by the trees or the porch columns, but one that moved. She blinked. At the edge of the light stood a young man, soaked from the rain. Hood pulled up, shoulders hunched, a duffel bag slung across his back. He wasn't coming up the steps. He wasn't knocking, just standing there. Take a deep breath. Let surprise give way to stillness. Elsie didn't panic. Her heart didn't race. Instead, something inside her grew. Still. She rose slowly, opened the front door. The porch light lit up his face, young, probably 20, pale, uncertain. "Evening," she said softly, her voice just louder than the rain. "Are you all right?" The young man shifted his weight. "I don't mean to bother. I was walking. Got caught in the storm. Saw your light." Elsie nodded. "That's what it's for." He looked down. Didn't expect anyone to answer. "Well," she said, "sometimes the light speaks before we do." She invited him to sit, just on the porch. No questions yet, just rest. She brought him a towel, then a sandwich, then a cup of warm tea sweetened with too much honey, the way Tom liked it. They sat together in the glow of the porch light. The young man didn't say much, neither did Elsie, but it was enough. Later, as the rain eased and the young man stood to leave, he turned back. "I'm sorry I didn't knock." "You didn't need to," Elsie said. He hesitated, then added, "No one's left a light on for me in a long time." Elsie reached toward the switch, but didn't flip it off yet. "Well," she said gently, "maybe you needed reminding." He nodded and walked back into the knighthood, up duffel swaying, but no longer lost. Elsie sat back down. The tea had gone cold. The candle on her table flickered. She whispered, "Thank you, Lord," because sometimes the smallest welcome is a doorway to grace. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You may not always know who needs the light you leave on, but God does. Your quiet faithfulness makes room for His mercy. Part 3. Letters never sent, love never lost. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. The morning after the rain, everything glistened. The porch steps were still damp. The leaves sparkled with leftover drops, and even the bird bath looked like it had been polished by heaven's hand. Elsie sat on the swing with her Bible closed in her lap. Not every morning was for reading. Some were just for remembering. She rocked gently, letting the air breathe around her, and slowly, her thoughts turned to Ruth, her daughter. It had been 3 years since they had spoken. Not from anger, not really, just ache. Ruth had moved far away, new life, new town, a rhythm Elsie no longer belonged to. The calls had grown less frequent. The cards came only at Christmas, and even those had become shorter, quieter, more distant. But Elsie never stopped praying for her, and she never stopped leaving the porch light on. Just in case, she whispered, almost daily, take a deep breath. Let the memory of someone you love rise softly in your chest. That afternoon, she opened the drawer beside her rocker. Inside were letters, unsent, each written to Ruth over the years. They weren't long, some only a few lines. You crossed my mind today when the robins came back. Remember how you used to sit with your peanut butter sandwich and name every single one? I made your favorite cornbread tonight. Still too dry. You always made it better. I forgive you for not calling, for not coming. I know life is heavy. I love you anyway. Elsie traced her fingers over the paper. Then carefully, she chose a fresh sheet and began a new one. This time, not a memory, but a prayer. Lord, meet her where I cannot. Be her comfort when I cannot hold her. Be her guide when my words cannot reach. And if she ever finds her way back to this porch, let her find the light still burning. She folded it, tucked it beneath the others, and then she rose, slowly, tenderly, the kind of rising that comes with years and wisdom. And as evening approached, Elsie turned on the porch light once more. She didn't know who would see it. She didn't need to. Some lights are not meant to attract attention, only to offer direction. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even when love feels unanswered, it is never wasted. God carries what we cannot reach, and He holds close the ones we can only pray for. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. The weeks passed gently. The garden began to bloom again modestly, not in wild colors, but in quiet greens and soft whites. The lilies were always first, bowing their heads as if in prayer. Elsie kept her rhythm. Each evening, she would sit in her chair by the door, tea in hand, Bible close, the porch light on. It had become less of a routine and more of a presence, a way of saying, here I am, Lord. Still waiting, still trusting. She didn't expect visits anymore. Not really. But she never stopped preparing for them. There were always 2 chairs, one for her and one just in case. One Thursday evening, as the sun was just brushing the horizon and the moths had begun their quiet circling around the porch lamp, Elsie heard the familiar sound of footsteps on gravel. Not hurried, not hesitant, just familiar. She looked up. There stood her neighbor, Mrs. Penfield, widowed, quiet. Some said she was prickly, but Elsie had always seen the softness behind her stern eyes. She was holding a plate, wrapped in foil. Take a deep breath. Let the unexpected kindness of others settle in your soul. I made too much pie, Mrs. Penfield said, holding out the plate awkwardly. Elsie smiled, her eyes warm. That's the best kind of problem. The woman lingered. Then, quietly, I see your light every night. Makes me feel like someone's still awake in the world. Elsie nodded toward the second chair. Would you like to sit? There was a pause, a long one. Then Mrs. Penfield lowered herself slowly into the empty seat. They didn't speak for a while. The candle inside flickered softly on the kitchen table. The porch light hummed overhead. Finally, the older woman said, Sometimes I think I'm invisible. Elsie turned gently. You're not. I forget things now. The house is too quiet. I eat frozen dinners. And I talk to my husband's chair more than I talk to people." Elsie reached for her hand. "You can talk to me." And in that moment, the second chair wasn't just a seat. It was sanctuary. That night, they shared pie and silence and stories they hadn't told in years. And when Mrs. Penfield finally stood to go, she looked back once more at the glowing porch light. "I think I needed this more than I knew." Elsie smiled. "That's why it's on." She watched her neighbor walk down the path, steadier than when she came. Then she sat back, wrapped in the hush of the hour. The two chairs remained. Only now, they both felt filled. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Sometimes, offering a chair beside your light is the most sacred kind of ministry. You may never know how deeply it heals. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Psalm 23:4. There came a week when the wind wouldn't stop. It howled through the trees and rattled the shutters like an old song played too loud. The sky stayed low and sullen, heavy with gray. Even the birds seemed to hide, their usual hymns replaced by silence. Elsie wasn't well. Not sick, exactly, just tired. A deeper kind of tired. The kind that wraps itself around your bones and whispers, "Lie down. You've carried enough." She stayed in bed most of the day, the blankets pulled up to her chin. The house, usually so full of quiet life, now felt too still. The porch light was off. Just for a night, she thought, just until I feel stronger. That evening, as she lay watching the soft swirl of dust in a beam of fading light, she felt it, a strange ache not in her body, but in her heart. Something was missing. Not a person, not a word, a practice. Take a deep breath. Let the rhythm of what you've loved return. Gently, Elsie sat up slowly. Her legs trembled, her hands shook, but still, she rose. She wrapped herself in her thickest shawl, one stitched years ago by Ruth in the colors of autumn. The hem was fraying, but it still held warmth. And then, barefoot and breathless, she walked to the door. Her fingers found the switch. Click. The porch light blinked. Once, twice. Then it flickered into life, dimmer than usual. But there, a gentle beam reaching out into the dusk. Elsie stood in the doorway, steadying herself against the frame, and she whispered, "Still here. Lord, still waiting." She didn't sit on the porch that night. She returned to bed. But something had shifted. The light was back on. And in that small act of turning it on again, despite weakness, despite fatigue, there was worship. The kind of worship that doesn't sing or preach. The kind that simply says, "Yes, I'm still yours." That night, she fell asleep with her hand resting on her Bible. The wind outside calmed a little, and in the glow of that quiet lamp on the porch, a few neighbors glanced out their windows and smiled because the light was back, and somehow that made everything feel all right again. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even when your strength fades, your faith can still shine. God sees your light, even when it flickers. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. It was a Tuesday. Soft sunlight spread over the garden like warm breath over a mirror. The air was gentle again, and the wind had lost its sharpness. It was the kind of morning that asked nothing, only offered. Elsie moved slower than usual. but she had made it to her chair by the window. Her legs ached, but her spirit was light. She sipped warm water with lemon and looked out toward the porch, where last night's light still lingered faintly in the glass. Then came the sound she had not expected. The mail slot clicked. A soft shuffle. A folded envelope. A return address she hadn't seen in years. Ruth? Elsie held the envelope with trembling hands. She didn't open it right away. She simply sat, eyes closed, heart gathering itself around a prayer she didn't have words for. Then, carefully, she opened the letter. Take a deep breath. Let grace arrive gently, even if it's been a long time coming. Mom, I'm not sure why I'm writing now, after so long. Maybe because the children asked about you last week. Or maybe because I saw a porch light left on in the middle of the night. And it made me cry. I think about you more than I say. I carry you in my hands when I bake bread. I hear your voice when I hum lullabies. I miss you. I'm sorry I've been silent. Life swept me into a place I didn't know how to come back from. But I want to try. Do you still leave the light on? Love, Ruth. Elsie read it 3 times, then pressed the paper to her chest, eyes closed, whispering, Yes, child, the light never went out. That evening, for the first time in years, she added a 3rd chair to the porch. Just in case, she lit the candle in the kitchen. She brewed 2 cups of tea, one stronger, the way Ruth liked it. And then, as the stars arrived one by one like tiny messengers of joy, she stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, but not cold. She flipped the switch. The porch light glowed, and she whispered into the night, I'm here. The door is open. Come home when you're ready. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God answers prayers in His own time, often gently, and always with love. Never stop leaving the light on. Part 7. A return without words. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22-23. The days that followed felt like petals unfolding. Small movements. Soft hope. Elsie began to move with more purpose, even though her body was still slow. She swept the porch, changed the cushions on the chairs, folded a clean quilt, and set it on the rocker beside her own. There was no announcement, no plan, just readiness. The letter had awakened something in her, not a certainty, but an openness. She lit the porch light each evening now, not just as habit, but as invitation. And then, one Thursday afternoon, as the sun filtered through the oaks in golden threads, a car pulled into the drive. It was older, dented on one side. Familiar. The door opened slowly, and Ruth stepped out. No suitcase, just herself. She stood for a long moment, hands at her sides, unsure. Elsie didn't move at first. She didn't rush to the door or wave from the porch. She simply waited like the house had been waiting. Like the light had. Ruth looked up, her eyes catching the porch lamp glowing faintly even in daylight. Her shoulders shook once, then steadied. She climbed the steps slowly. When she reached the door, she stopped. Elsie opened it gently. Take a deep breath. Let the moment meet you before you speak. They looked at each other. 2 women, 2 stories, 2 hearts still learning the rhythm of grace. Ruth's eyes brimmed. I didn't know if you'd want me. Elsie didn't speak. She just opened her arms. Ruth stepped forward, and for the first time in a long time, the distance closed. Not through words, through presence. They sat on the porch that evening in silence. The tea grew cold. The candle glowed inside. and the porch light it remained on. Ruth looked at it once, then down at her lap. "I saw it before I turned in," she said, "and I knew I could come." Elsie took her hand. "You always could." Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Forgiveness doesn't need fanfare. Love, when true, makes room quietly, and always with the light left on. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Colossians 3:15. It was a soft morning, the kind that drifted in like a sigh, where light touched every corner of the house as if gently waking it from a long, gentle sleep. Elsie rose slowly, but not alone. Ruth had spent the night in her childhood room, the one with the faded floral curtains, the old bookshelf, the creaky twin bed still covered with her grandmother's quilt. It had been years since anyone else had breathed in that room overnight. And yet, it had waited quietly, just like the porch, just like Elsie. They sat together at breakfast, neither of them in a hurry. Ruth sipped her coffee slowly. Elsie buttered toast with careful hands. No explanations, no pressure, only peace. Ruth glanced at the corner of the room where the candle always sat. "You still light it?" Elsie nodded. "Every night." "And the porch light?" Elsie smiled. "Every night." Ruth looked down. "I don't deserve all this," she whispered. Elsie reached across the table and gently touched her daughter's hand. "Love doesn't ask what you deserve. It only asks if you're home. Take a deep breath. Let mercy settle where shame once lived." Later that day, they folded laundry together. Quiet work, gentle rhythm. Each shirt, each sheet, each towel folded not in haste, but in care. And that evening, Ruth offered to light the candle. Her fingers shook just a little as she struck the match, but the flame rose strong. They placed it by the window as always, and then they stepped onto the porch, shoulder to shoulder, to flip the little brass switch. The light blinked once, then glowed. "I used to think your porch light was just a habit," Ruth said. Elsie turned toward her. "And now?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I think it was a prayer, one that waited without words." Elsie nodded, then whispered, "Sometimes the best prayers aren't spoken at all." That night, they sat under a quilt, watching the fireflies blink in the darkness. They didn't talk about regrets. They didn't rehash the missing years. They just rocked gently, letting love speak in its own quiet language, letting peace take its time. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The things done in love, quiet, steady, and unseen, are the threads God uses to weave his comfort. They are never wasted. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119:105. The day settled into something holy. Not extraordinary, not dramatic, just whole. Ruth stayed longer than she had planned. She made soup again in the old blue pot. She helped trim the hydrangeas by the porch. She even cleaned out the attic, laughing at her childhood drawings tucked inside a dusty shoebox. Elsie watched her daughter move through the house with care. Not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as one returning to something more than a place, returning to peace. And still, every evening, they turned on the porch light. Together now, no longer for strangers, no longer for hope unanswered, but as thanksgiving, as worship. One evening, as the sky turned lavender and the breeze carried the scent of pine, Ruth stepped outside before Elsie. She lit the porch lamp slowly, then stood beneath it, eyes lifted. "What do you think it's seen?" she asked when Elsie joined her. Elsie looked up, her face soft. "Oh, this light." Ruth nodded. Elsie took a breath, thoughtful. It's seen joy and grief and long waiting. It's watched you ride your bike when you were 5, and it stayed on the night your father passed. It's lit the way for neighbors, strangers, prayers, and now, you. She paused. It never asked who was coming. It just stayed ready. Take a deep breath. Let your heart remember the lights that waited for you. Ruth was quiet. Then, with a voice steady but full, she whispered, "You were the light." Elsie smiled. Maybe, but I was only keeping watch. The real light never went out. They sat together again, porch quiet. Chairs creaking softly in rhythm with the wind. The candle burned inside. The porch lamp glowed outside. And between them, a kind of knowing filled the air. That love is not measured by noise, or distance, or how quickly someone returns, but by how long you're willing to keep the light on. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God's love waits without weariness, like a porch light left on. It shines gently through all seasons, ready for your return, and steady in your rest. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. Proverbs 4:18. It happened in spring, the kind of morning that blooms quietly, the kind where even the birds seem to sing softer, where the grass glistens, not from rain, but from something gentler, something eternal. Ruth had gone into town for groceries. Elsie had stayed behind, wrapped in her shawl, sitting in her favorite chair by the window. The candle had burned for a while that morning, just a little prayer before breakfast. Just enough flame to say, "I'm here, Lord." When Ruth returned, she found her mother asleep, head resting gently to the side, Bible open on her lap, one hand still holding the corner of the page. There was no struggle, no sound, only peace. And the porch light, still on. The house was quieter in the days that followed, but not empty. Every room held something, a memory, a warmth, a welcome that hadn't faded with breath. Ruth stayed. She moved into the house slowly, one drawer at a time, not to erase the past, but to live beside it. She kept the candle in the same spot, kept the tea mugs, kept the 2 chairs on the porch, and every evening, as the sky softened into dusk, she stepped outside and turned on the porch light. The same switch, the same glow, the same quiet hope. Neighbors noticed. Sometimes they waved. Sometimes they stopped by with warm bread or questions about the garden. One day, a young woman new to the neighborhood knocked softly on the porch rail. "I just wanted to say," she said, "when I see that light on, it makes me feel less alone." Ruth nodded. "It made me feel that way too." Take a deep breath. Let the light within you rise gently like morning over water. Years would pass, seasons would turn, but the light remained, not because the switch had magic, not because the house was different, but because love had been planted there. Patient love, welcoming love, light leaving, grace waiting love. And when Ruth grew older, and her hands, too, began to tremble, she taught her daughter where the switch was, how to light the candle, how to steep the tea, how to keep a place ready for the one who might be coming home. And so it continued, even when no one came, even when no one knocked. The light stayed on, because some lights aren't about who sees them, they're about who they remember. Final bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are part of a light that never goes out. passed from heart to heart. It shines on quietly, faithfully, until the day we see the morning that never ends.